The midday sun beat down on the faded asphalt of the naval base parking lot, baking the air in waves of shimmering heat. Inside the sprawling utilitarian complex of Building 47, the atmosphere was only slightly cooler, thick with the smell of coffee, industrial floor cleaner, and the quiet hum of computers. This was the unglamorous heart of the shore-based administrative division, a world of requisition forms, personnel files, and endless logistics. For Chief Petty Officer Miller and his tight-knit crew, it was a kingdom of comfortable routine. They had their rhythms, their jokes, and their unshakable pecking order. The arrival of Petty Officer Third Class Elena Rossi shattered that routine like a stone through a still window. She walked in on a Tuesday morning, a slender figure in crisp, perfectly pressed utilities, as a large duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Her name was announced in a brief, monotone email from personnel that morning. New transfer, PN3 Rossi, assigned to administrative support. That was it. No fanfare, no background, no context. To Miller and the others, she was a blank slate, and they filled it with their own assumptions. She looked young, maybe 22, with a serious face and dark hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She didn't offer a wide smile or try to make a bright first impression. She simply stood at the front of the bullpen, her dark eyes scanning the room with an unnerving stillness, as if she was cataloging every exit, every desk, every face. Her gaze lingered for a fraction of a second on the American flag standing in the corner, then moved on. "Well, I look what the tide washed in," drawled Petty Officer Second Class Jenkins, leaning back in his chair, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. He was the office comedian, a role he performed with relentless and often unfunny dedication. He gestured to a dusty, forgotten desk in the corner, piled high with outdated manuals. "That's your kingdom, sweetheart. Try not to get lost on your way to the coffee machine." A few snickers rippled through the room. Miller, a gruff but not unkind man in his 40s, just gave a short nod. "Rossi, get settled. Jenkins, get those TPS reports done by 1400. The dismissal was clear. The show was over. Rossi didn't react to the joke. She didn't blush, frown, or offer a witty retort. She just looked at Jenkins, her expression as blank as a wall, and then walked silently to her designated desk. She didn't ask for help. She simply began to move the pile of manuals, stacking them with quiet, efficient precision. She placed her duffel bag on the floor, opened it, and began to unpack. There were no family photos, no novelty coffee mugs, no personal touches, just a few standard-issue notebooks, a pack of black pens, and a well-worn copy of a naval regulation manual that looked older than she was. Over the next few days, Rossi became a ghost in the office. She was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. She spoke only when spoken to, and her answers were always short, polite, and devoid of any personal detail. She completed every task assigned to her, filing, data entry, answering phones, with a speed and accuracy that was almost unsettling. A stack of files that would take Jenkins a whole afternoon to sort through would be neatly organized on her desk within an hour. Her silence was a vacuum, and the office gossip rushed to fill it. "Maybe she's on the spectrum or something," Jenkins hypothesized loudly one day at lunch, stabbing at his salad. "Socially like, a total zero." "Or maybe she's just stuck up," offered Seaman Lewis, a young man eager to please. "Thinks she's too good to talk to us." "Quiet ones are always the weird ones," added Petty Officer Davis, a woman with a sharp tongue and a love for drama. "I heard she requested the night watch shift next week. Who does that voluntarily? She's probably hiding something. An ex-boyfriend, a gambling debt." Miller, listening from his office, felt a flicker of something else, He'd seen a lot of sailors in his 20-plus years. He'd seen the boisterous newbies, the eager beavers, the lazy ones, the broken ones. But he'd never seen anyone quite like Rossi. It wasn't just her quietness. It was the way she moved. It was a fluid, economical grace, a complete lack of wasted motion. When she walked to the printer, it wasn't a casual stroll. It was a direct, silent path. When she reached for a file on a high shelf, she didn't stretch or strain. She simply rose onto the balls of her feet in one smooth, powerful motion. He'd also noticed her hands. They were never still. A pen would be spun and balanced between her fingers with a dexterity that was mesmerizing, the movements so fast they were a blur. It was a fidget, he supposed, but one of intense, controlled focus. The mockery, however, continued to fester. It was the little things, a deliberately misplaced file, a sarcastic good morning greeted with her usual silence, Jenkins pretending to jump in fright every time she silently appeared beside him. They called her the Ghost, Robo-P.O., and Wednesday Addams in a uniform. They painted her as an outsider, a social misfit who didn't belong in their easy camaraderie. The title newcomer was spoken with a sneer, a label for someone beneath their notice. They had no idea that the silence they found so strange was not a sign of weakness, but a fortress. The afternoon of the incident had started like any other. The air in the bullpen was thick with post-lunch lethargy. Jenkins was loudly complaining about a new form that had to be filled out in triplicate. Lewis was staring blankly at his screen. Davis was painting her nails at her desk, a blatant violation of regulations that no one ever bothered to enforce. Rossi was at her desk, her back straight, her attention focused on a stack of personnel records. The only sound was the rhythmic click of her keyboard and the low murmur of a radio playing classic rock from someone's desktop speaker. Then the first shout came. It wasn't from inside the building, but from the corridor leading to the main entrance. It was a raw, guttural sound, a roar of pure, incoherent rage. Before anyone could even process it, the door to the bullpen slammed open, crashing against the wall with a deafening bang. A man stood there. He was a civilian, a hulking figure in dirty jeans and a stained T-shirt, his face twisted in a mask of fury. His eyes were wild, unfocused, darting around the room. In his right hand, I clutched so tightly his knuckles were white, was a large military-style knife, its blade glinting dully in the fluorescent light. He took a staggering step into the room, his chest heaving. The office was frozen in a tableau of terror. Jenkins's mouth was open, but no sound came out. Lewis scrambled backwards, his chair tipping and crashing to the floor. Davis let out a choked scream, frozen in her seat with the small bottle of red nail polish still in her hand. Miller, half risen from his chair in his office, was reaching for the phone, his heart hammering against his ribs. 40 seconds can feel like an eternity, and in that first horrifying second, it felt like time had stopped. The intruder's gaze swept the room, seeing only fear. He took another step, raising the knife. "Where is she?" he bellowed, spit flying from his lips. I know she's here. I'm gonna—" He never finished the sentence. The world, which had just frozen, suddenly lurched into a speed that was impossible to follow. One moment, Rossi was a silent statue at her desk. The next, she was a blur of motion. There was no battle cry, no hesitation. She moved like a force of nature, an embodiment of pure, trained instinct. In the same fluid motion of rising from her chair, her right hand shot out and snatched a heavy glass paperweight from her desk. It wasn't thrown. It was an extension of her arm, a brutal, precise missile. It flew through the air in a flat, deadly trajectory and slammed into the intruder's knife hand. There was a sickening crack, the sound of bone breaking, and the knife clattered to the linoleum floor. The man roared in agony, clutching his wrist, but Rossi was already in motion. She closed the 15-foot gap between them in a split second. Her body dropped low, her left leg sweeping out in a perfect, powerful arc. The sweeping kick connected with the backs of his knees, buckling them instantly. As he started to fall forward, she was already rising, her right elbow driving up and into his solar plexus with tremendous force. The air left his lungs in a whoosh, and he collapsed to the ground like a sack of cement, gasping and writhing. It was over. It had taken, as the headline would later say, less than 40 seconds. From a dead stop, Rossi had identified the threat, selected an appropriate non-ballistic weapon, disarmed the assailant with a devastating strike, and neutralized him with a flawless combination of hand-to-hand combat techniques. She now stood over the groaning man, her breathing only slightly elevated, her expression calm. She looked down at him not with anger or fear, but with the detached assessment of a professional evaluating a completed job. She then did something that cemented the moment in the minds of everyone present forever. She looked up from the man on the floor, and her eyes scanned the room, finding each of her colleagues in turn. Her gaze paused on Jenkins, who was still cowering behind his overturned chair, his face ashen. It moved to Davis, who was staring wide-eyed, the nail polish bottle rolling unnoticed from her lap. It settled for a moment on Lewis, who was pressed against the far wall, trembling. Finally, her eyes met Miller's through the glass of his office. In that look was no triumph, no smugness. It was just a devastating confirmation of everything they had failed to see. The silence in the room was now absolute, a stark contrast to the chaos of moments before. It was a silence filled with the crashing sound of their own prejudice. They had mocked her quietness, her differentness. They had filled her silence with stories of social awkwardness and personal failure, and in 40 seconds she had revealed the truth they were too arrogant to perceive. She was not a misfit. She was a weapon. The first person to move was, surprisingly, Jenkins. He scrambled to his feet, his face a complex canvas of shock, dawning horror, and profound, gut-wrenching shame. He stared at the man on the floor, then at Rossi, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The witty remarks, the sarcastic jokes, they were all gone. I washed away in a tide of reality. He had called her a ghost, a robot. He now understood that her silence wasn't emptiness. It was the quiet of a coiled spring. The base security team arrived minutes later, summoned by Miller after he finally found his voice and his phone. They swarmed the room, their own shock evident as they took in the scene. A massive, moaning civilian with a broken wrist and the breath knocked out of him, and a slight, unassuming female sailor standing calmly nearby, already providing a concise, unemotional report to the lead officer. She spoke in clear, clipped sentences, using terminology that made Miller's blood run cold. Subject neutralized, Master-at-Arms. Primary threat eliminated via distraction and close-quarters defensive tactics. A subject is secured for your processing. As they handcuffed the intruder and led him away, the office slowly began to breathe again. But the atmosphere had changed forever. The easy camaraderie, the comfortable hierarchy, was gone, replaced by a thick, awkward tension. People moved around Rossi's desk as if it were a sacred and terrifying shrine. They spoke in hushed whispers, their eyes constantly darting towards her. The mystery of her past didn't last long. By the end of the day, the base's rumor mill, so quick to create fictions, was now furiously grinding out the truth. A call from a concerned commander to Naval Personnel Command revealed the details that the initial brief transfer email had so carefully omitted. Petty Officer 3rd Class Elena Rossi was not just any sailor. She was a graduate of the grueling Basic Underwater Demolition / SEAL BUD / S training program, one of the very few women to have ever attempted it, and an even rarer few to have successfully completed it. She was a qualified Navy SEAL, a member of the most elite special